And we are live once again for another Lethal Introspection crew. Woo! In order to be able to speak about, as you can see in the title card, The Lighthouse. A movie that honestly was only lightly in the periphery of my radar when it came to movies that I go and seek, and man, after having seen it, I don't know if I ever want to see it again because it was a strange one.
Yep.
I have here with me today Hannah and Matt once again.
Hello.
Hello.
In order for us to be able to really dig deep into what exactly it is that happened in this movie, or at least what we can assume happened in this movie. I'm gonna begin by asking Hannah really quick, what exactly were your first impressions the first time you watched this movie, and then we will run around the room over to Matt and then myself, just to as the last individual who has seen this movie most recently. I would really like to understand where it is that you guys are coming from.
The first time.
Yeah, exactly.
Boy, this movie was a tough one for me. The first time I really watched through it, I'm actually excited to kind of have this conversation and participate in this discussion because this really left me at a loss my first time through it. The one impression that it made on me, and this doesn't really have anything to do with the meaning of the movie, but one thing that I wondered about it was just the constant sound throughout. I found exhausting through this movie. Like, they were trying to make you feel tired or strained from just sitting through the whole movie.
That is very true. Matt, what are your first visceral feelings when it came to watching this movie?
Well, I tend to agree. Excuse me. I think there's like Hannah was saying about like Hannah was saying about the siren. What it reminded me of the first time that we watched it was the same siren that goes off in Silent Hill, especially the film version. In that movie, they use it more like a sign or a signal of like shit's gonna get fucked up now, but it also has that sort of oppressive quality. I think the foghorn especially is oppressive, so it really enhances that. But I agree. There's and A24 I think does a really good job with their films in this too, where they instead of outright horror or psychological thriller, they go for the slow burn, the really oppressive, make you feel uncomfortable throughout the whole film type of feeling, and yeah, that's what I got too.
I agree entirely with what both of you guys are saying. You can most certainly now tell, having this been my second movie with a Robert Eggers flick. And what's the name of the studio? A24?
A24 is the one that keeps putting out all the... Like, they did Hereditary and The Witch, I believe, as well.
Yeah.
I didn't even remember that this was the guy that did The Witch until you pulled up this title card.
He's the acclaimed director. You can most certainly tell that he has a style. And I'm actually very glad that by pure coincidence and happenstance we were able to go one after the other in terms of at least this, because you can most certainly tell all of the tricks that they use in terms of the fact that, as you said, they kind of go more for like phenomenological horror. Like, they really just mess with your ability to tell what exactly is real and where exactly it is that, even from the confines of the movie's own rationale and logic, like whether the characters themselves are going insane even from within the confines of the movie's as I said, logic. And it does in fact just leave you just rattled at the end of it all, because it did feel exhausting. Everything from having the foghorn blast, that's the first thing I said. I was like, okay, well, I can already tell what's exactly going to cause me to go insane if that's going to be a consistent thing. And then trying to put yourself in the position of being one of these wickers is what they call them, right? Wikis.
Wiki,
Yeah, being one of these wikis, having to be stuck there into the position of essentially having to maintain the thing that's driving you crazy, I think is one of the things that just stood out to me right away. When it comes to characters, again, I'm going to try to go around the circle, starting with Hannah again. What exactly is it that these characters really made you feel and think about, just for first principles of having watched the whole movie and stuff?
I think off the bat, Thomas made me uncomfortable, and I think I could probably speak for the whole table on that point. Whereas I was much more blank slate with, I'm not sure if we're going to go ahead and refer to him as Ephraim, or
sure,
we can do that.
Yes. That was his chosen name as far as
at the beginning.
As far as this character in his life now being, he is now Ephraim, right? He decided he wanted a new what's the word?
Clean slate.
A clean slate. There you go. That's exactly what he named it.
Yeah, and I think with him, he's much easier to relate to or understand at the beginning of the movie. You really feel like he's the sane one and the one that you're empathizing with and the one that you're connecting with, because he's really the main, he feels like the main character in the beginning, and you just don't really understand what's going on with the other character.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that too. I completely agree. It seems when you start the movie, he's your point of focus, and you all the way up until the night before he's set to leave, or they're set to leave the island. He is sort of the reliable narrator, and then that near the halfway point, that's when the unreliable narrator kicks in and you're not sure. I also thought that Willem Dafoe fucking knocked his role out of the park. I've never seen like a person that more embodied a raggedy old sea guy than Willem Dafoe did, but
he was scurvy in human form.
Yeah, very much so. That's actually a perfect description. But yeah, and then Robert Pattinson's character as well, I super liked. I dig that he did it seemed like a Boston accent almost. It really reminded me of Daniel Day-Lewis's Bill the Butcher, same sort of cadence, but
I can see that.
it's yeah, he really knocked it out of the park for me too. Yeah. What about you?
Well, the characters were most certainly enticing in their own way. You're right in the sense that we're, again, just from it being a movie, right, we have to, like, there are just particular things that we just take for granted as the viewer, that, okay, so this guy is the newest individual in the setting, so because of that, I trust him now more. You know, it's like there's just this, like, almost automatic instinct of being like, okay, well, you obviously know as much as I do about this situation, so we should probably team up together in terms of figuring out this mystery, because obviously this old man has been here for a long time, and who knows what secrets he might potentially be hiding in this situation. And as a result of that, yeah, you do just kind of begin to get chummy with the character of Ephraim right away, in terms of always sympathizing with him and being like, God, this guy isn't, like, this dude is a dick. Like, what, like, that he, it seems like he takes advantage of his post as the quote-unquote captain of this, you know, or at least supervisor of this position, to the degree that he monopolizes what he considers to be the best post, which is supposed to be something that's supposed to be shifted in a normal position, but he has decided that, no, I'm gonna get to do what I consider to be the nicest thing, which is looking at the light. And screw you.
So would you say your first impression of Thomas's character, for you personally, would you say it was synonymous with Ephraim's first impression?
I would say so, yeah. I mean, he did not lend himself to be liked in any sort of way initially. Like, he doesn't give you any form of reason to be sympathetic with him, because right away he is crass. He essentially puts Ephraim in a position where he's telling him that in order to be okay with him, he has to break the rules in terms of drinking alcohol and things like that. So he's already putting him, you can tell, in a position of compromise, and him having the monopoly on authority there being nobody else to check him on his abuses, automatically just puts him as the dog. And it's very, very obvious as the movie goes along why it would culminate in the way it did at the end there, considering that if we're going to take it from the perspective of it just being a psychological break, much like my take when it came to the Vitch, because I really do just like seeing it from that perspective, it just from my first principles, because I just think that the real world and the fragility of our psychology is scary enough. Like, there really is no need for a monster anywhere, because we can conjure them so easily within our own minds.
I feel like we jumped at. I mean, are we going on that assumption for you then? Do you think it's more of a psychological break situation? Because if that's your opinion on it, I would like to ask what you think about Thomas referencing his previous helper at the lighthouse going mad with the same illusions of the mer people and the light and everything there.
Yeah, I would say that there is a particular I would say that actually doesn't push me any further away, because if the circumstances are what drive you insane, and the circumstances are exactly the same for each individual, say in terms of these assistants, it doesn't really seem like that big of a logical jump to say that they ended up breaking almost the exact same way. And you also have to consider the fact that a lot of this movie runs on gaslighting. They say a particular thing, and then that particular thing happens later, and then it makes it seem as though it was always happening. And if I would recall, he gets told about his last assistant in the first conversation that they have, right? He asks him about very, very early on, before we can even begin getting to the alcohol-induced unreliable narrator. There is already a particular thought inside of Ephraim's mind in relation to what Tommy told him happened to him. So because of that, it isn't, again, it isn't too much of a leap that his mind, not having a lot of things to think about, literally his environment around him is just flat land, aside from this one small little piece of rock that he can see, which is an entire 180 to the place that he was before, with all of the trees and stuff like that. It's an entirely different area of the planet, to the degree that I would imagine only helped exacerbate his inevitable break, at least as far as I saw the movie.
Yeah, the way that you hit the nail on the head, where you're just the priming that he's doing and the foreshadowing that ties into that, but exactly tells him what happened to his island mate before he came. And that just like you said, I think up until the unreliable narrator schism, when he actually starts to drink, and then we get that weird throwaway line about how they've been here for weeks, just minutes after that scene. Yeah.
And he found the mermaid figure in the mattress too, which could also contribute to the same sort of things you're seeing. And a lot of the movie is very sexually charged, because there's two men alone on an island. It probably would be more difficult to imagine finding a woman out there than it would be to
especially
find a mermaid.
A pretty man. they keep mentioning, Tommy keeps mentioning the fact that that Ephraim is a very handsome individual, and as a result of that, I mean, he calls him out. He seems to call him out almost on his entitlement as to like what he believes the world owes him in one of his long monologues. And I think that is probably, I would imagine, probably based on some, as he said, Tommy just spent too long away from people. So because of that, he no longer knows how to act like a human. He just knows how to act like the wiki that he is now. And it must have been so difficult to be able to go, again, if I want to believe that if that guy spent a good month sober, right, and that whole month did in fact happen to him, working really, really hard, and then afterward, everything just kind of falls by the wayside. I mean, yeah, that's a lot of abuse to take on for a very long time, especially if you're already in a position such as Ephraim, wherein, and I'm going to have to ask you guys' help here. What exactly is it that happened to his last supervisor when he was working in Canada way? Like, I don't...
So watching it a second time hasn't really helped very much on the clarity of that. Do you...
Oh, no?
Well,
yeah.
I mean...
If you got it, Hannah, please explain it.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of room for me to be wrong, but my understanding of it is that he was abused by that manager as well, pretty much nonstop, had a hard time with it, and one day out at work he was considering killing him, and he wanted to, but he slipped, basically, into the logs, and instead of saving him, Ephraim stood there and let him die.
A little smoke, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
There were just a few little thematic things I wanted before we got on to the second half of the movie.
Oh,
or
of course,
whatever.
yeah, of course. Go ahead.
The and I don't know if this is like symbolism or not, because second time watching it, I'm just looking for different pair of eyes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole dragging the oil drum all the way up the staircase, only to have to bring it back down, seems a little Sisyphean to me. And then directly afterwards, and I don't know if they're blending genres or if this is on purpose or not, but when he first looks into watching Thomas work the lighthouse and he sees the tentacles, there was a little bit of like, is that like Lovecraftian mind break going on there? Because it was after that that things really started to go downhill, even before they started drinking. But, or at least that was like the first moment where you're like, can we trust this guy? Like, is he really looking at tentacles up in the lighthouse?
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of things that indicated being a mental break on the part of Ephraim, like his confession to how his previous co-worker, manager, I'm not really sure how to refer to him, but how he died could indicate it was guilt-driven, or that he just had taken so much abuse and being pushed down in his life. But I mean, it sounds to me like most of us are on the page, like definitely a mental break happened somewhere in this movie, but there's a whole second half of that. Who's crazy? One, the other, both? Is one just antagonizing the other? And, you know, there's a whole lot to figure out after that I feel pretty much at a loss at. So I'm curious to get your thoughts coming into it fresh-minded.
Yeah, I mean, I am unfortunately very confused. This one isn't one that my brain parsed out easily as as a lot of other movies that I usually see. This one just left me confounded because of the amount of gaslighting happening. The most, if we're just gonna go by scenes that strike me, you know, the scene that pretty much just broke the dam for me in relation to the gaslighting was the one when Ephraim was pushing the boat out because he just wanted to leave, and then Tommy is the one that comes with the axe and destroys it, and then runs inside and tells him right away that he's the one that was chasing him with the axe and destroying the boat.
No, you're crazy.
Yeah, exactly. It's again like Rick and Morty, where it's like gaslighting doesn't exist and you're crazy.
Made it up as you.
That's me crazy.
Yeah, I never thought to assign that word to it, but really, if you just look at Thomas the whole movie, it really is just constant gaslighting, as long as we assume that everything that he says isn't true. And it's interesting to look at the effect that gaslighting can have if there's only two people in this world for you.
Oh, for sure. And when those two people are placed in a position of subordinate and master, like that is actually one of the bigger things that I think resonated with me in terms of why the psychological break went the way it did. Because I would imagine that if they were two shipmates that were, say, both sailors and both in the same rank, I would imagine that there would have been a lot easier time delegating duties, keeping each other in a position of in check, because Ephraim can never speak his mind entirely when it comes to Tommy, right? Tommy always pulls rank when things get a little too dicey in terms of the conversation. If he tries to call him out on any bullshit, he always has the ledger to hold over his head, and I mean, he is actively using it. If we're to take Ephraim's word on what is written on the ledger, you know, Tommy is making it so Ephraim pretty much is stuck in this position. Because let's run with the thought that, let's say that night wherein he was supposed to leave, the boat actually comes. He passes out because he's obviously not used to that level of drinking after, you know, who knows how long since the last time he might have had a drink. It could very well be that maybe the last time he had a drink was when his last supervisor died. Maybe it was, you know, there was some, you know, alcohol was, you know, intermixed there too. Just for the sake of going with it. And Tommy intercepts the boat, talks to the captain, shows him the ledger of how things are going, and be like, no, I think this guy needs to stay for a little while longer in order to see if we'll actually be able to get some good work out of him. And by the time that he wakes up, he's already pretty much been screwed by that point.
It is interesting that he really got pushed to drink the night before the boat was supposed to arrive.
Yeah.
And then just glass fill after glass fill quickly.
Yes, he went out of his way to make sure that they had 3 visible not just shots, but drinks. Because there's little pulls. Yeah, there's little mugs every single time. Yeah, I don't know. At first, I was thinking, I was like, is there was the alcohol like maybe laced with something? But then, I mean, Tommy drinks it too, right? So I would just imagine that he just has the fortitude to be able to drink that much and then be able to wake up and do his scheme, the next morning in a way that Ephraim wouldn't be any of the wiser to it. I can't entirely say that I remove the supernatural aspect of it though, because I mean, when he killed the seagull, everything literally shifted from that moment onward. Most certainly does put quite the supernatural or extra natural foreboding on the situation.
But that's another preset one where he was told that it was bad luck to kill a seabird.
Oh, more priming. Yeah.
More priming.
That is very true. Yeah, I mean, and I'm sure that one of the reasons why he probably felt so antagonistic toward the seagull, aside from it just being a piece of shit, was probably because he felt that he wanted to be, what is the word, defiant to essentially the edict that he put down in the saying that you're not supposed to harm birds and stuff, and then he even slapped them essentially, when he said that.
Yeah, so he really hammered it in.
Yeah.
And I think we absolutely can assume that Ephraim has a psychotic break, because he's the only character that we're ever alone with. And when he sees things clearly is when we see things clearly. And when he starts to get confused is exactly when we start to get confused. So I even think that we can question some of the things he saw later in the movie. I think that we could speculate that things that he saw when he was sneaking up to the lighthouse, when he was looking up into the lighthouse, I think we could even say that maybe he imagined everything to be coveted up there because it was being withheld from him. So he might have imagined it was something more desirable or more interesting up there.
That's the one thematic lens that I can't get away from looking at it, which I think is maybe the most obvious one, is the Promethean references. It's really hard for me to imagine in that sort of story what Thomas represents as far as the god that is holding the fire captive, and Ephraim being the one who steals the fire of the gods, And the first time we watched it, that was the major impression that it left on me, was that because that last scene of him holding the light seems so powerful with the loud noise and everything. And so watching it the second time, I'm wondering, what are the things that Thomas is doing in line with what a god might do to prevent a human from stealing the fire from the gods, or what sort of ways that might affect him acting. How much of this theme is he pushing into that character,
I see. Yeah, just from the perspective of the director and writer,
right.
You mean?
Right.
Yeah, because I would imagine that it has to be in there somewhere, because they even added into the actual lines of dialogue, and the last scene in the movie is starkly obvious, a reference to a more maritime version of the Promethean curse, where as opposed to a falcon, it's a seagull that's eating his entrails and stuff like that. If we do just want to fall into perhaps saying that there is some form of supernaturality to it, it could very well be said that maybe it's his thoughts that put him in that position, right? Because he, when he was masturbating, and you see the flashes of what goes on inside of his brain, it looks like he rapes the mermaid, right? Because the mermaid is stranded ashore, so you can only assume that he just has his way with her. And if we're going to say that a mermaid is perhaps a nymph daughter of Neptune or something like that, one can then extrapolate from there that perhaps it is essentially a curse laid upon this man for having those kind of, because we know that back in the day when it came to Greek tragedies, it didn't take that much for the gods to curse you whatsoever. Like if it could just come down to the impurity of your thoughts, or just having doubt in relation to your post, essentially. And he is essentially guilty of all of those things to a particular degree, because he doesn't, he isn't wholly subordinate. Like he wants to have his own name. He wants to not just be called boy and lad. He's asking things of his supervisor that, if we're looking at it from a very classical perspective, wasn't taken lightly back in the day. Like the whole consideration of you, like your essence comes way before you're ever born. Like you are this wiki guy from now until forever, essentially. And the fact that you're trying to go up in station by just trying to apply yourself as a equal to your supervisor already puts you at odds with that schema, essentially. All the while, Tommy is very, very, what's the word? He understands his place to the point that he forgoes all of his outside life, essentially, to take care of this one area. So in a particular way, he loses a lot in the rest of the world, but he gains essentially his small kingdom in that little island. And you would imagine that from the perspective of a person who has in his mind sacrificed so much to be there, to have this upstart come and try to tell you, hey, like, I want to go see the light too, like I want to go do all these things. I mean, it would make you want to slap him. I mean, like, so, and I mean, if Tommy were to represent like the gods essentially keeping Prometheus away from the fire the entire time, I would imagine that's probably the closest I could see it in terms of that theme being there. Like Tommy is just essentially just the gods smacking his hand away from supposedly what he wants. But I think to keep it to the maritime theme as well, it actually is an entire inverse of the Promethean story, because in the Promethean story he actually takes something, right, and gives it to other people in order to be able to make their life better, even if it causes Prometheus' downfall. In this situation, though, there is nothing inside of the light. There doesn't really, I mean, when the light opens, what I personally gathered from my watching was essentially the fact that he came to realize that it was just a light bulb that he was coveting this entire time.
That was my take as well.
And the moment that happened, that's when the genuine big break happened, where it's like, oh my God, I did all of that for nothing. Like, it was the fact that there was no Promethean fire up there to actually be like, yes, now this will give meaning to all of the things that I did before, pretty much cemented the fact that although he died like Prometheus, he didn't have the same. Just because you hold the same essentially thematic stepping stones doesn't mean that at the end you're going to get to be the quote unquote hero of the story.
And that would be, I mean, I know that it's difficult to tell his reaction in the scene with all the noise and everything, but what it looked like, especially with the subtitles that were very helpful in this movie, it looked like he moved from laughing to screaming, which would be my reaction too if I opened the light and saw nothing, and then slowly came to realize that I killed the only friend I have had for several months.
And not only that, but unlike the situation out in Canada where he could leave, let's assume that maybe he did decide to go into the woods and just kind of leave whatever like work that he did because he was afraid that maybe the cops would try to pin it on him, you know what I mean, or the authorities would just try to get him as an easy, giving him the benefit of the doubt that he didn't actually kill his supervisor. He just slipped, but he didn't do anything to help him. He probably, as he said, took on the name Ephraim as he did, and then just decided that he wanted a clean slate. You can't do that on the island. The only means for him to ever leave is for someone to come and rescue him, and at that point, questions will have to be asked, and there is nowhere to run after that. So he's essentially, he has to be stuck with his own sins at that point. There's no more running away. Once you made it to the middle of the ocean, it's like, where are you gonna go? Underwater, So it seemed like like his sins caught up to him to a particular degree.
Yeah, there's a lot of crime and judgment sort of back and forth as the film continues to. A lot of the fact that it takes the whole run of the movie for Ephraim to tell us his sordid past and to spill his beans, it really lends to that. It almost reminds me of like Raskolnikov in a way. Maybe it's like the fever dream setting the movie already has.
Crime and punishment for anybody who wants to.
I get the same feeling of like this. He's tortured, and it takes him, I don't know, anywhere from 2 to 4 months of gaslighting for him to spill his beans about it,
Yeah, and again, giving him the full benefit of the doubt that he didn't intentionally murder anyone. Survivor's guilt is still a very, very real thing that can very easily break you, even if you weren't the active complicit, party in the situation. Mm-hmm. Just the fact that he slipped and I did nothing, just having that replay inside of your head, and he does because he has nightmares about it, wherein he's actively walking to the ocean as the logs are closing in, and eventually that's when the first time you see the siren scream, which if we want to mesh the supernatural aspects of it, what might have been the initial call to the curse, essentially. It's like, you've brought your sins here too, it's like, this place used to just be a place, but now that you're here with all of your anxieties, guilt, and baggage, now you've made it into a terrible, you're the one that made it into a terrible place. And essentially the mermaids sirened for Neptune to come and give him his judgment essentially. Starting with his, initial emissaries, which are the seagulls, supposedly. Like the seagulls, if we want to keep to the supernatural, the seagulls know, who he is. Like the seagulls can smell who he actually is on him, and they won't leave him alone.
So what about, because Thomas once said seagulls carried the souls of sailors who had met their maker, could it be possible that this one seagull that was harassing him, or even the seagull in the end, not that it aligns with the sailor analogy, but could be this man that he let die in his mind, and that's why he had the meltdown about it?
Well, that's what the first seagull, the one that dies in the cistern that he comes out to find after the first... Is that after the first morning that they were drinking?
I believe so, yeah.
And he pumps, and it's just black liquid that comes out, and he goes and he checks, and there's the dead seagull in the cistern. The second time watching it, I was like, is that his boss, or is that like...
And then he intentionally killed the next seagull.
Because that seagull also...
It was
all you could see was its white head sticking out of the black mixed with white sludgy water, which was the same sort of visual that he had from looking down on his old boss's blonde head as he was on that whatever it was out in the water. But it looked very similar, and so that's what struck me anyway, the second time.
And then followed immediately by him intentionally killing a seagull that was then picking at him is, I think, very distinct foreshadowing.
Now, was that before or after he fell off the lighthouse when he was painting? When did that happen? Because I also would have to wonder how long he was out for. He fell from a very high place.
That was prior to them, the drinking night, the first drinking night, because they were preparing for, I believe, the winds that were coming, or whatever.
Yeah.
Trying to brighten up the paint.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. It's a very fever dream movie.
Yeah, it really is. I'm having a very difficult time putting, maintaining the synchronicity, chronological synchronicity of it together, just because of the fact that, much like Ephraim's problem, there is no markers to tell you that the time is actually even passing, especially after he broke the clock, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of normal shipment movement that would let you know when 2 weeks has gone by. They don't get any extra rations the entire time that they've been there, at least as far as we get to see it. You get to see 3-4 months in the span of 2 hours, so who knows if within that time somebody went by or not. But I would have to imagine that once the winds began, which was at least 2 months, right? It seemed like I mean, who knows how long it actually was that the bad weather began, but supposedly, according to Tommy, there has been precedent of bad weather lasting for up to 7 months in that area before. And
more priming.
Huh?
I said more priming.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems like
yeah, you're totally right. Especially because soon after, he's like, like, is this island real? He's like, am I real? I'm probably just a figment of your imagination. You're probably like dying of hypothermia out in Canada, like just being like knee deep in snow, just trying to figure out some way to escape. Your guilty conscience, essentially.
I really can't separate myself from him intentionally causing doubt in his mind because of those type of comments that imply that he's crazy, as well as the contradicting stories that we hear him talk about his leg and his
Past
history, and other things, as well as all of this bullying that, like, this rank throwing around that we watch Ephraim fold to 3-4 times in the beginning of the movie.
Have it your way.
Yep, and he's like, okay, aye, sir, and he keeps folding as soon as rank is thrown to still have nothing positive about him in the ledger. It's just, it seems like Thomas is intentionally sabotaging him in some way.
Yeah. And to what end exactly is my wondering too. It's like, I can only imagine that, again, it just comes from the fact that he's just been stuck on this island of isolation for so long that the only games that he knows how to play anymore are essentially mind games with the people who are there.
So my two thoughts on that, like, I could go either way on this. I think on one side of it, potentially Thomas likes the company because they partied together, they had a good time together, he gave him compliments eventually, even if he just needs a companion. But the other side of it is, I feel like in this movie we watch everything from Ephraim's perspective. So from Ephraim's perspective, we very well may not see, I mean, if we're seeing his side, we might see him in a pretty good light at the beginning. And that's kind of like, maybe he did actually mishear Thomas. Maybe he was belligerent and difficult, it's...
I mean, the things that he wrote down on the thing weren't lies per se,
No.
right? And also the fact that when it comes to the ledger, he just opened up a page, right?
Yeah,
There wasn't any mention of a date or anything like that. It could very well be, giving everybody the benefit of the doubt, that at the beginning of the situation, he did have, mid marks, and then eventually, as time went by, high marks. And up until the point when he's like, yeah, one day you'll be running your own lighthouse, somewhere else. And then that's when the alcoholic descent, both in terms of his psychology and his work ethic, began to essentially take the most massive hit. Because there was no greater tell of that than the fact that there was just leaky roofs all over the place after the first incident of them drinking highly.
And the water continued to taste bad the entire movie.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Yeah, they were in a position where they could have easily probably died of like dysentery or something if they would have kept drinking like the nasty cistern water. So they had no choice but to keep drinking alcohol, much like people did back in the day when they were, on ships all of the time, and seawater or fresh water was so limited that you only used it, as an antiseptic, or just if you're that close to dying. Like if you can hold off with just drinking rum or whatever, or the vodka that they might have been drinking, you just do that, all right? Because we can't, especially in a position where, if we want to believe the fact that their rations did go bad entirely out of no one's fault, yeah, then they're in even more reason to ration. And again, here comes the gaslighting, right? Where he's like, I've been telling you for weeks that that we should be rationing. And it's like, what? You just told me right now that it went bad. Like, no, I told you weeks ago,
That's a tough one for me because I feel like that could be just a need to cast blame.
Yes.
I have a difficulty assuming that Thomas manipulates to no positive end for himself. I have a difficulty thinking he does it just for the sake of it, especially when he needs help around there for his own living conditions.
Well, there's something to be said for sure about alcohol and the role it has to play, where like you don't see somebody that isn't like guilt ridden to their bones that drinks the way that they do after they actually start drinking. The fact that he doesn't want to do it because of the rule book at the start of the movie seems pretty fallacious. Nobody has that kind of constitution.
And Tommy calls him out right away. It's like a man better have a good reason why he doesn't want to drink.
Yeah.
You know.
Exactly. Yeah, referencing his sins basically. But yeah, that nobody. That's what's the line from Blazing Saddles? Man who drinks like that isn't gonna live long, and I forget that. Anyway.
Come with direct quotes next time.
Yeah. I'll look it up beforehand.
I'm curious if we can shed any light on it by kind of exploring the impressions that everybody has from what they're like when they do drink together. They switch between weirdly affectionate to violently sparring.
Yeah, the mood swings there.
Yeah, and I mean the level of affection it hits almost makes me uncomfortable at points. That it's just so strange that they have this weird strained relationship, and then they almost seem like a couple at times when they're really drunk together.
If anything, that actually seems entirely par for the course in terms of what their relationship is like. It seems like almost a very basic abusive relationship, wherein you have your moments that Tommy, as the superior, quote unquote superior figure, will dispense a kind word to Ephraim, and Ephraim Ephraim will cling on to his smile. You know, I mean, he'll tell a joke. You know, he'll appreciate the joke, but it never lasts too long. There always needs to be a break to that to that, because they can't ever get too chummy in the same way that an abusive spouse or a partner could essentially gaslight you in that exact same way, wherein it's like, no, like I'm a good guy, and you can obviously tell because there are times when I give you your due, and when I tell you that you're entirely right, and but right now that's not the case. You know?
Yeah.
Like whenever it matters, they've already put it. It's you're never right. They've already messed with you in the position that they will concede every once in a while in trivial matters, or they will allow you to feel, as though you're contributing or moving up in rank, at least in certain terms of their mind. But then the moment that something happens, such as the ration situation, where I would agree with you in the sense that it did just feel like a whole just. The necessity to cast blame at that moment. It's like, hey, I'm the captain, and you're not about to tell me that it was my fault that the rations went bad. Like I'm the one that told you to go fix the shingles. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it just seemed like it was like almost so basic in its manipulation that it lends itself to easily trying to superimpose like a supernatural aspect to that too. The answer is so obvious that you're like, but that just seems too easy of an answer. Like this old man is just like tricking, playing with this kid. Like, no, there has to be like Neptune has to be cursing him, or you know what I mean? Like, or else they wouldn't have bothered to make this movie, right?
Maybe,
right, Roger? Or Robert?
Robert, yeah.
Maybe he's insecure about his own sanity. Because it's questioned at the beginning of questioned at the beginning of the movie, and he does definitely, I mean, if we're to believe what we see in the movie, does some things that are questionable or strange, and maybe that's his way of kind of digging his feet into the ground is, no, you're crazy,
If you want to look at it from the perspective of Tommy's lack or loosening of his mind, you can. The one thing that really struck out to me was the way that he characterized and anthropomorphized the lighthouse. It was his wife, essentially. No better wife than he's ever had it before.
Not uncommon to how sailors talk about the sea in old literature, though.
That's very true. Yeah, but at the same time, you have to consider that those feelings come from a desire for alienation, because they're like, they're the ones that feel as though they can't hack it out in the real world, amongst all of those people. I'm better off with my ship, or I'm better off with the sea, or I'm better off with my lighthouse, because at least this one won't talk back.
Yeah, he does say she's quiet.
Yeah, exactly. And if the sea kills me, at least it'll kill me right away. You know what I mean? Like, it won't kill me with its nags. Yeah. I would imagine that if he does have that almost like sexually charged like anthropomorphizing of the lighthouse, the fact that he sees Ephraim, this handsome young buck, coming in and trying to like be like, no, I want to take care of like the upper part of the lighthouse, the jealousy aspect would just kick in on his side of like being like the jealous spouse of this essentially beautiful lady, as he sees it, right? Of being like, no, I'm the one that gets to take care of you. You take care of all the shit, all right? Just to and be lucky that we, she and I let you stay here, essentially.
I think he directly references that a number of times when he says, "I'd never let another man touch her or go near her." He says a few things very, very aligned with that. And it's also, I think we also see the light, as we talked about earlier, as a status position, a dominance card to play.
It seems like throughout the movie you watch those tables slowly turn. I mean, at the end it's super clear who's the subordinate one to whom, and that it's also interesting that you mentioned the compliment thing. It seems like Thomas, like you were saying, Thomas was giving compliments throughout the movie here and there to Ephraim, and he would catch on to it and latch on to it, but I don't think we ever hear it the other way around. And there's that point when they're drinking up late the one night where we actually see Thomas visibly upset that
he can't get a compliment,
that he doesn't like his lobster. Right?
Yeah, he curses him. I mean, like he
curses
to
he
die.
becomes Poseidon in that moment. Yeah. And
then finally he folds and says, "Have it your way. I like your cooking."
No, I like your cooking. Yeah, it's it's very interesting just seeing how feeble the mind can get in that kind of position, especially just having the right circumstances for levying that manipulation on somebody else. Because you really couldn't ask for a better place to be if you're the kind of person who wants to always be on the upper hand of somebody else. Like, no one's gonna come and check on my abuses. Like, this guy has to do what I say. Like, his future and his wages are in my hands, because whatever I write will be exactly how much he gets paid.
Isn't that that makes me wonder about the manipulation, though, because my first thought when you're saying that is that, like, how do you keep this person in line if it's only the two of you? This person can decide not to do anything you say. All you have is threatening wages and threatening the ledger and your feedback. That's it. If they decide they don't care about that, you're in trouble. So maybe that's part of the manipulation, is just so you're the grounding force. You're the sense of sanity and the sense of calm. And I'll just tell you what to do, and you need to go do it because you don't understand anything that's going on here.
That's entirely right. Up until the point that Tommy actually is the one that dictates the phenomenology, because he's like, how long has it been? Has it been weeks? Has it been months? Like, it's up. Like, I'm the one that tells you how long it's actually been. I'm the one that lets you know if tomorrow the ship will come.
Yeah.
There isn't, at least as far as I could see from this first viewing, there wasn't anything that let me know that a ship was coming, the next day. Like, usually, like, you would imagine that there doesn't seem to be any telegraph poles, any like courier system or anything like that would let them know, aside from potentially like that just being like a predetermined date already. But if that's the case, then that means that they can tell the time, right? It's like how, like, what exactly was keeping Ephraim from being able to maintain his own log of time, aside from there really was no means of doing so, because Tommy literally hoarded time itself as well away from him, like, to the degree that every day in and out is just essentially him being the dog to on the island, essentially.
And that could explain why he broke the clock, is he was tired of that hand being held over him, where he had no concept of this thing that this other person seemed to have a concept of. And maybe I'm wrong, but I don't remember a specific number of days being defined for him at the beginning of the movie either.
He was set to stay there for 4 weeks. And then the night before he was set to leave was when they started drinking. And then there was also a midway point 2 weeks in where he asks Thomas to call him by his name.
Right.
And have that conversation.
So
it seems that we're pretty solid chronologically up until the night that they actually start drinking.
That the alcohol actually begins to take its effect in terms of their ability to maintain any form of cohesion.
And the audience, us as well.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, because that's always one of the unfortunate side effects of being anchored to one narrator, is the fact that the moment that they begin to lose the plot, so do you, but you're still in it with them. What do you guys think about the potentiality of this just being, it's such a played out trope, but what if this is just purgatory, right? For Ephraim at the end of the day. Like, as far as I can remember, there was no boat that actually dropped him off. He just started walking toward the lighthouse, and...
the very first scene we see the boat plunging through the water towards the island.
But we could also... with saying that, we could also say that I didn't really see him complete any tangible tasks. Like, he fixed the roof, but the roof still leaked. He salted the water or did whatever with the cistern, and it was like still
lye
dirty.
or whatever.
Yeah, and that's what... You don't really see him actually accomplishing things or fixing things or making any of it better. Because I actually noticed later, after he fell off the lighthouse... Later in the movie, when we see the lighthouse, I was trying to determine if it looked painted or not. I was looking for the space that was painted, and it was very difficult to tell if he had finished the whole thing or if he had never really painted any of it.
In the fact that Thomas is sort of... It almost seems like he's goading Ephraim the whole time, with the insults and the calling him a dog and whatever.
Dropping him a few feet on the
it's
line.
almost like what you're doing right now isn't going to fix your problem. You need to atone for your sins. So I like that purgatory angle too.
Yeah, it's I didn't even want to play with it because it just seemed too obvious almost, I was like, but at the same time, it's really, really difficult to get away from it, because although he quote unquote confesses for his sins, he still does it from the perspective of when you're seeing him like do the quasi confession upstairs, when he's like, you spilled the beans, you shouldn't have spilled the beans. He's also doing it from the position of like, I didn't mean to, or he just slipped. Like there was no genuine remorse or like actual atonement or seeking for forgiveness in relation to it. Like just saying the words doesn't mean a confession, and doesn't mean the fact that you actually are seeking to be quote unquote forgiven for what you did or didn't do.
When he says he was thinking about killing him and he looked at the back of his head, but he said I didn't, and then he reiterated I did not.
And the fact that he said all he could think of afterwards was I just want to smoke. Yeah,
it's almost the way that you just said that right there almost makes it sound as though he's seeking to reassure himself that that's exactly what it is. Not so much that he's retelling, but he's essentially trying to cement that story inside of his head. It's like I didn't, like as though he's worried that at any moment he'll slip and say whatever extra thing might have occurred, but he needs to hammer that idea home that he did not do it. He was looking at the back of his head and he slipped, and I was so traumatized that I just decided that the first thing I needed to do was smoke. I can see that. I can totally understand that aspect of it. If again giving him the benefit of the doubt that he didn't actually kill his supervisor, but it is just being ridden by survivor's guilt, essentially.
Well, what he did seemed guilty to me too. How he said after it was done and he was dead, he basically said, "I packed up his things as though they were mine."
He doesn't seem bothered
No,
at all.
not in the least.
No, not at all.
You would have to not. I mean, I can't imagine packing up his things and taking them for yourself after you just watch this person die if you're experiencing any sense of guilt at all, or remorse, or even real shock. I couldn't imagine taking their things.
It seems too methodical.
Yeah, that seems...
Like it was what you were going to do if you had killed him.
It feels like that's what the goading was about. Was almost like, come on, Ephraim, tell me. You know, without... Even though he was saying, don't spill your beans, don't spill your beans.
Which is actually another form of priming in and of itself, with reverse psychology being like, hey, no, you don't trust me, don't tell me. You know what I mean? Like him just continuously telling him, don't trust me. And he's like, I do trust you, you know? And he's like, if he believes that by deciding to trust Tommy when Tommy tells him not to, he's making the choice to trust him. Yeah, when in reality it's just another layer of manipulation.
Why would he tell me not to trust him if he's not trustworthy?
And then you just positive feedback loop that thought over and over inside of your head as you're getting shit on by birds, you know?
Yeah.
Feed in a bunch of alcohol and some bad memories.
Yeah, and you know, it almost seemed at the end as though Tommy was a specter of the island, because at the end there, when supposedly he buries him inside of that hole, and he's like all bruised up and stuff, I didn't get the best look at Tommy when he came around the corner with that axe, but he looked clean. He looked clean, and it looked like his eyes weren't like all like beat up or anything like that. It looked like he had literally just like reiterated again, you know, and ran inside, and he's like, that's my, it's my light, and stabbed him in the arm, and then he just killed that specter really quickly, essentially.
Also, one thing I wanted to bring up that kind of relates to Tommy looking clean there, or Thomas looking clean there, is when Ephraim does make it up and he's looking in the light, he has blood all over his face, and as he's staring into the light, it slowly disappears.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I didn't really quite notice that. I thought
his
that
face
was just...
absolutely covered in blood. It was black when he first came up.
And then the light overtakes... Yeah, it like removes... Cleanses him, yeah. But at the same time, perhaps not, right? Because it doesn't seem like if we're gonna give the lighthouse a supernatural entity at the top of it, it seems like the lighthouse rejects him at the end there.
Well, although it's not clear where the blood came from on his face. I was even curious if it came from his own shoulder.
I thought it happened. I thought it came from when he slammed the axe on Tommy's head, and it splurted back on him. I believe that's where it came from.
It could easily, but I remember being surprised when he was crawling up the stairs at how much blood was on him. I did too.
Yeah, the previous scene, it didn't seem like there was that much blood on his face.
And then it was just like, it looked like it was in the shape of a skull or a mask around his face.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, because who knows what he might have done with that body, you know? Right. Because supposedly when we see it happen, it looked like as though it's midday, right? When he like grabs Tommy and makes him run outside like a dog, you know, and put him in that hole. Yeah. And then he grabs the keys, he goes inside, and it looks like that whole interaction happens within the span of 10 to 15 minutes, right? And because he decides like, I'm gonna go up to the lighthouse. No, wait, give me a second. I'm gonna run back inside and I don't even know what he did.
Do you want to dab a smoke?
Yeah, there you go. And yeah, so, and then that's when Tommy comes in and stabs him, and then...
Sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. But I'm just trying to, like, get the chronology inside of my head, because it's like, okay, that was still all daytime. And much like in the movie The Witch, at the end, right, the culminating situation happens in the morning time. Literally the first thing in the morning. But it isn't until the very night that we actually see the culmination of that, of her actually trying to convene with the devil and trying to get... So who knows what other psychological breaks might have occurred within the spans of those hours that may have exacerbated them to the position of now I'm going into the lighthouse, or now I'm speaking to Black Peter, you know, to the degree that the devil is now, you know, forming in front of me, or behind me, I guess, and declothing me, and then telling me to write my name on the book. It really seems like they have a really huge theme, this movie and that one, in terms of capitulating responsibility. Like, like it's somebody else's fault that these situations are happening. Like is always kind of what it seems like, both from the perspective of Ephraim and man, I am blanking on the girl's name. Thomason, yes.
There's another lapse in time too, because there's a lapse in time from when he kills Thomas and it's nighttime when he goes up in the light because all the windows are black and the light is illuminated. And then there's another time lapse because he falls down the stairs. There's another time lapse to how he ends up outside on the rocks completely naked.
That is so true. How exactly is it that...
Because there's no clothing around him either.
No, there isn't. Yeah, he'd have to get himself naked to walk all the way out to the very edge of the island in order for them to end up getting pecked at by seagulls. Mm-hmm. It's like, and even that situation happened what looked like at daybreak, right? Mm-hmm. So
it looked like first thing in the morning.
Yeah, again, first thing in the morning. So it like how much time, you know what I mean, went in between those aspects, and like what else occurred inside of his mind that we again don't get to be privy to that put him in that position. Like, yeah, it's
But jumping back a little bit to when he did kill Thomas too, I just wanted to point out another consistency between the death of the actual Ephraim. I think that's whose name he took.
Yes. Because his name is, what's his name? Tommy Howard.
Yep.
Right.
His real name
is Tommy Howard.
Thomas Howard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But when he starts burying Thomas and Thomas dies, he seems to take like a brief moment that like might have been reflection. And at first when he goes up, because he runs on him as soon as he seems to stop breathing and he's picking him up, but really what he's doing is he's taking his keys as though they were his, without any other, like as soon as he finds the keys he drops him and he's out of the hole.
And isn't it also interesting how you get that small little scene, what looks like a nightmare, wherein Tommy is walking, just for the sake of consistency, Ephraim is walking over to Tommy and he's grabbing him, and then Tommy is Ephraim and vice versa, with then essentially the archetype of Tommy being exemplified as the lighthouse, with like the light like shining out of, and then revealing the fact that he is Tommy essentially. I'm wondering if that is actually, maybe that is some form of showing that maybe Tommy, when he was young, came to the island for the exact same reason. He was actively running away from a crime too. So because of that, he can smell when another individual is, and he kind of mentions that too, is like he like that like people don't just get like gravitate to this job for no reason, like they're like, you're actively like trying to run away from something. And what a bullshitter can tell a bullshitter kind of situation. So because of that, he knows exactly the kind of manipulation necessary to make an individual such as themselves break to the point that, hey, now I have this blackmail on you. I know exactly what you did. I know your real name. It's like, you better do what I say, because maybe eventually one day, if help is inevitably coming, if you don't stay on my good side, Tommy, somebody's going to, someone's going to have to explain to somebody why it is that this man is walking around with fake papers, from a man in Canada who died in a, timber accident.
So here's a crazy idea that I'm just going to throw out for a response. Is that I think it's interesting that they're both named Thomas and the younger one goes by Tommy, which just seems like a younger type of name for the name Thomas. Maybe it's more of like a split personality thing between his younger self and his current self, and that's why we can't keep any sort of who's crazy, what's going on,
little like
type
fight,
of pulse on it.
Like Fight Clubian.
Yeah.
Sort of.
It would most certainly help in figuring out how it is that Tommy can always see him in his lowest position, right? Like how is it that Tommy can be privy to the fact that he goes out to the shed and masturbates? You know what I mean? If he does it when he's like, I would imagine he does it when he's asleep, right? Like he probably waits till Tommy's asleep and then he's like, just go down there and do his business and then come back, right?
Like a gentleman,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because they're awake and asleep at different times.
Exactly.
Too. There should be plenty of things that pass without Thomas knowing about it.
Yep, exactly. But he seems to be entirely almost omniscient to everything, every bad thing that Ephraim has done on the island.
And maybe Ephraim didn't clean the floor over twice when Thomas is insisting he didn't clean it.
Oh, you mean like he's at, like that is actually like a position where Ephraim was lying and Tommy's just calling him out?
Just knows it.
Yeah, because I mean he doesn't. You would imagine again a person who actually is innocent of washing the floor twice, as he says, would have put even more resistance, you know, to it. But at the same time, that is when he begins to do the pulling rank very, very strongly. And, you know, that's when he tells him, is like, if I need you to, you know, like suck every single one of these nails in order to be able to suck the rest off the nails and then remake this whole place. You'll do it and you'll smile as I, you know.
You'll like it because I'll tell you you're gonna like it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, once again priming him to, you know, essentially just making him into the putty that he needed him to. And it just seemed like he, you know, he kind of he played his hand too hard. Essentially, he didn't. After a while, he perceived himself to be in such a monopoly of authority that Ephraim wasn't going to actually put him in a position of being the dog, or you know, or taking the light away from him and stuff like that. But I do like to like if we're keeping to like the purgatory theme of, you know, torturing yourself, essentially, of being like Tommy could be, or Ephraim could be young Tommy coming back essentially to haunt each other, essentially, you know, in the sense that even if you committed the sin when you were young, if you didn't bother to do anything, if all you did was alienate yourself and did not seek any form of or repentance or, you know, or penance in order to be able to fix what you did, you know, just more of it is just going to come for you, and eventually, like, you know, the sin will pretty much kill you in that particular way, because it doesn't really strike me as too much of a logical leap to say that perhaps Tommy did kill his last second hand.
I was thinking that too.
Like, it could very well be that they're both there for the exact same reason, and it could very well also be that to a certain degree, maybe because it looks like they work for the government, right? Like, it looks like it's a
trading company,
like a state-run lighthouse to a particular degree. That maybe the government, like, this is like a penal system from, you know, like from a position of the government of being like, hey, like, we know from the positions of our systems, right, that a normal human being who has a family, who has high prospects, and who actually has a future in life does not want to go be a wiki, right? We can only assume that anybody who wants this job is probably doing so because they want to get away from, you know, from society and life.
But that's also not how Ephraim frames it up. He framed it up as a lot of money in a short period of time and no opportunity to spend it, so he could stow it away and then go put his roof up somewhere else someday.
Yeah, I mean, that could very well be the sales pitch for it, you know, in the same way that exactly, that it looks that those kind of stipulations are perfect for the kind of individual who is, you know, who has a torrid past, who is like I am of low impulse control, so I need a place where I am isolated, so I don't fall to the wayside in terms of my bad habits and stuff like that. And, you know, like, all of those things would just be exactly the kind of thing that would make the job appetizing for an individual such as that. And, you know, like, it's very often said that professions, you know, call upon certain people. You know, like, there are just certain people who will gravitate to a particular job, and other people just do not have the type of, you know, wherewithal or mental constitution to do so. And I would imagine that's exactly how it would be, in the sense that, like, you can't possibly say that you could be a normal functioning person that leaves, like, because it's one thing to, like, say, go off to, like, the oil fields of North Dakota, you know, and work there, you know, hard 6 months, you know, around other people, and then come back with your $100,000, that you made, right then and right there. But it's like he says that it takes a year to make between $630 and $1,000. So you have to be willing to either continue moving around, lighthouses for that whole year, and again, it's like no normal person I feel would just like be willing to do that, like.
Well, and he could just, if it was his last job that situation occurred too, I could imagine that giving somebody a need to get away from society for a while, easily.
Yeah, I thought that it was very interesting how the two places that he ends, like almost like Ephraim is essentially like embodies the old saying of no matter where you go, there you are. In the sense that he literally took 180s in terms of his environment, from going from a forested area to a desolate island in the middle of the ocean, and yet the exact same instances, of supervisor abuse leading to supervisor homicide, leading, to a potential psychotic break. Because who knows what kind of potential psychotic break he might have had out in Canada, prior to eventually coming to this position where now he's just this quiet, very quiet distance, guy who doesn't drink because he's afraid of, whatever demon, might be stored inside of his brain.
I did think that contrast was very interesting, and I was glad you called it out in the beginning, of moving from, like, forest to an island out in the middle of the ocean. Is like the environments are 100% different. You can't see far around you versus you can see everything within your eye shot,
but there's nothing.
So they're equally as hidden from the world, I would say.
Yep. Yeah. And hidden in different ways, right? Because in the forest you're hidden amongst the many, which are the trees, and then here you're just hidden because nobody wants to be there.
Nobody's anywhere close.
Yeah. What about the mermaid? What exactly is it that, that's one of the issues with this movie. Not issue, but one of the features of the movie is the fact that I was never really able to tell when exactly it is that he was actually having a moment, in real life, and when it was that he was actually dreaming, and just because again, from the position of the priming, it's he the mermaid that he saw was very reminiscent to the Little Mermaid that he had on the Charm. And the way that he found that doll too is so interesting, right? It's would you imagine that? Would it be too crazy to say that Tommy put the doll in there in order to be able to have him find it? Because
it could, but it could also be. He did, didn't he?
Yeah, near the end, he accuses him of placing that charm with him. Yeah.
I almost wondered, I got torn when I first saw it because seeing it the second time through, it being stuffed into the mattress that he sleeps in almost seems like a weird kind of curse or a hex sort of thing. But then you go to consider it might have been left there by the previous man who slept there, who is now dead as far as we assume, or Thomas could have placed it in there.
Yeah, man, it is so difficult to say. What did you guys think about the fact that it was all in black and white? What did you guys? Let's do a little round table again in terms of just that decision, in terms of what it brought forth to the movie, Because it could have been in color, right? There's nothing keeping it from being.
I personally enjoyed the stylistic decision that it was in black and white, and I think for a lot of reasons. I think it helped to really hit home the feeling of confusion. I found myself trying to make out what things were a lot of times, and I think the black and white added to that effect a lot of ways. And I think the black and white paired with the constant sound pollution really creates a unique vibe of the movie that I think helps make it unforgettable.
Yeah, just I agree totally. Like we were saying earlier, the sort of fever dream atmosphere to it. When it's black and white, you can't necessarily tell when it's daylight or when it's nighttime unless they're directly outside. You don't know when, you know, they're all drunk and partying and singing with each other, you have no idea when that's taking place. It also sort of lends to the, like, grittiness. Everything, in black and white, everything just looks dirtier and grungier and more downtrodden. I really like that, too.
Yeah, I agree entirely with how it kind of seemed like they decided to bring down one knob and then just make the other one go up super high in terms of being like, okay, we're going to remove the visual cues of what color can, you know, give you in terms of what's happening, and we're just going to up the audio, you know, the audio situation to the nth degree, and like you said, pollute the whole situation with those constant deafening and really insanity inducing kind of siren calls, pretty much. Yeah, I totally agree. I'm always a little skeptical when it comes to using black and white, just because it just feels almost token, as you know, like
kitschy.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what are you doing here? You know what I mean? It's like, are you just trying to just, you know, like, I mean, for lack of a better word, just be pretentious, like, in terms of, and you're using it. But in this situation, I mean, they used it beautifully, because it really did help in never allowing you to have an anchor as to when things are occurring. Like, you are really just moored out at sea when it comes to watching this movie, because, you know, the visuals in front of you are black and white, right? In both, in the thematic sense and in the visual sense. Like, what is it? Is it a fever dream or is it real? You choose. You know what I mean? It'll be one or the other. And again, like, Robert Eggers and his A24 people are just really, really masters at maintaining ambiguity when it comes to walking the line of the supernatural and just the negative placebo effects that your body makes, essentially, when it comes to these positions, right? Because it behooved Ephraim for Tommy to be a bad guy, like, because he needed to have a reason to hate him, and he needed to have a good reason to essentially come to the position of, you know, murdering him, almost, you know. Like, you say that Tommy gave you like ill omens to begin with, or made you uncomfortable. I felt that way about Ephraim, you know, because that's how I always feel when it comes to anybody who's too quiet to a particular degree, is the sense that you're just being very careful with your words because you have something in there that you just don't want to come out too easy.
Yeah, that reminds me of the Black Mirror episode with the sort of same premise of the guy going into the other guy's mind because he was a criminal of some kind, and he stayed there with him in that snowy hut or whatever.
Yes,
until he would
the Christmas
confess
one.
it.
Yep.
Yeah, same exact personality type, quiet, didn't want to say anything about it.
And in hyper denial, you know, like, that is the thing, is the fact that he has constructed an entire reality wherein he is the victim. Like they drove me to this position, you know, he slipped, you know, all of these things.
He's just trying to make a decent living.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, exactly. Everything about him, everything that he says has to have the caveat of innocence alongside it.
Yeah.
And I personally just find that an individual who actually is working from the position of good faith doesn't need to have those extra caveats, because you know them by their actions, essentially, as opposed to having to always add the addendum. So I'm a good guy, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just trying to mind my own business.
Man.
Yeah, trying to mind my own business. And it pretty much just gives you away, right? Like, you're seeking to conceal your persona, you actually are just essentially removing the mask even that much easier, at least to people who can be privy to that, which Tommy most certainly was in this position, right? Like, he probably thought that, oh, look, here's an old man, I'll probably just be able to be quiet around him, you know, like, just do my work for the month, get my earnings, and then just be gone.
He'll like me just fine.
Yeah, exactly. But all the while, he essentially got more than what he bargained for, because, again, if we're going to assume that perhaps Tommy also has a checkered past that puts him in a position where he has to lie about, you know, his wife, or how he got his bum leg, or how he got all of these situations, right? Like, you can only imagine he's told so many stories, so many origin stories to so many different assistants throughout, you know, time, that now the wires are beginning to get crossed inside of his own head.
Yep.
Which I can only assume probably lends to his desire to gaslight, because he's like, I can't keep my story straight, so I'm going to make sure that you don't know what is straight anymore, you know? that way it essentially takes away the burden from Tommy of having to maintain his, consistency of being like, no, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. Are we even here? Like,
Yeah. Going like back a little bit, but I think that that's another thing that I like about the black and white aesthetic of it, is it seems like the entire purpose of the movie and many stylistic decisions in it is to dilute the clarity, and I feel like the black and white did that as well.
Mm-hmm. It's a great tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, they utilized it.
It was just
well.
very par for the course decision.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think, at least from my personal perspective, we've spoken at length about the kind of about the things that jutted out right away about the movie, and
yeah, we'll save the fish pussy for next episode.
yeah, honestly, yeah, we'll just leave that. We'll just put that out in silence and just have that be its own thing.
We didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
You can think about that one.
Well,
on
maybe
your own
you
time.
guys do talk about it.
Oh man.
No,
Well, Hannah, Matt, thank you once again for joining me and being willing to share your thoughts about movies that you love. And I'm sure that we all grow from these interactions, because although it is just nice to watch a movie, it is, in my personal opinion, far more fun to actually get into the weeds of what it actually, the authorial intent and the authorial ambiguities that are placed in it, right? Because I'm sure that Robert Eggers probably doesn't even know what this movie is like about, and I heard this quote not too long ago, where it's like, you as an author, you don't make excuses, don't give any explanations either. It's like, you wrote it and this is how it happened, and people will accept it as it comes, and if they have more questions, we'll let them question it themselves. Mm-hmm. And I am very, very happy that they have such restraint when it comes to that, because in any other position you could have easily had a wall text at the end, being like, do you affect the situations in this, island where he was found 2 weeks later, you know what I mean? Just,
Yeah, I'm thinking midi-chlorians.
Yeah.
It's pissing me off.
Yeah, where everything just has to be hyper explained. Like, no, dum-dum, we cannot let you have imagination, because you'll ruin it.
Stupid.
Yeah, you'll ruin it.
You're not gonna get it.
Mhm. Yeah, well, here, we were essentially much like the themes of the movie, just given a lighthouse out far, and we just try to walk toward it to the best of our possible ability. And I think with that, we can all call it a good day and a good night.
Good night.
Good night.